Do you guys get to see like cards that Konami designed, but they didn't release? You ever get that?
Hell no.
Privilege? Okay, well,
hell no.
The good
hell
news,
no. I have to restrain myself here. Hell no. No shot. Every Yu-Gi-Oh player knows exactly the rant that I was about to go on, and I'm gonna restrain myself for the purposes of making this video not 5 hours long.
The good news is, well, I guess for you, the Hearthstone team has fumbled the bag and like put cards that weren't supposed to be in the client. They have tested cards that have been seen in screenshots they have removed. And more importantly, they have showed cards that they never released. And then later on in the game, they have released in a different version. Your job today is to review cards that have never been released before. Let me know what you think of it and why they were never released. But on top of that, do you think later on they released the card in the exact same vein?
Okay. All right. Yeah, okay. It's nice that your company actually talks to you about your game. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, okay.
I will say this might be the equivalent of the video you and I did where I showed you like cards from the anime, right? Because it's like it's similar in the sense that it's like these cards could exist in the game, but like they may or may not have, right? So I think it's like it's a similar analog to that.
I can see what you're saying. I would say that a lot of these are more like, I mean, I was gonna say they're more design decisions on like why they shouldn't be in the game, but I also believe like that's the case with the anime, right? Because some of the cards you showed me were like ridiculous. But okay.
Right, like the anime effects were just like not okay. You know, and there were some other cards that I showed you that like are just straight up like even crazier in some instances. But yeah, we're here for your stuff today. So let's see what you got.
Okay, go for it.
Shrine to Herik.
Close enough.
Interesting. 5 mana for an 0/5. Well, not like we would know because this card may or may not have ever existed. 5 mana for an 0/5. Can't attack or be attacked. Your spells cost health instead of mana. Holy shit, that sounds broken as hell. Okay.
Okay, so why do you think this card was not released into Hearthstone?
I wonder why. Basically because you could just dump your whole... There's this card in Magic I learned called Omniscience. I actually got to play it in a Commander game with CGB, and it makes everything basically free. Also, my commander, as a matter of fact, made it so that I paid the costs of my cards with life instead of having to... I had to delve them out too, but in any case, they're basically free. So this card it's free. You have 30 life in Hearthstone, so that means you can play 30 life worth of stuff.
Yep.
That seems pretty good. This is a 5 mana card though.
It is 5 mana.
But who cares? Who cares? You can just play your whole hand and probably just win the game. Yeah, okay. I do not think they printed this. No shot.
So all the first cards I'm going to show you were never released into the game. The question is, did they ever print a card that is somewhat close to that kind of effect?
Okay,
later on in the game?
Somewhat close. Let me think. How would they have to nerf this so that it would be acceptable in your game? There'd have to be a limit on either like the number of cards that could be played, or how else could they do it? Maybe they limit it to certain types of cards, like because this is spells, so I mean it's like I guess it's already limited in that way. I'm trying. God, this is any time I've learned from both you and CGB, when they have stuff that just lets you just bring stuff in for free, it's not okay in the slightest. So how would they tweak this? I guess they could do, maybe it costs like twice your health, like per card. I don't know how they would work that, but it's like if a card costs 2, maybe you have to pay 4 life to pay it, right? So it's like a really high risk, high reward type of card. Your game's also interesting because you don't have like you have summoning sickness and stuff. So like even if you play a bunch of stuff, you kind of have to wait. But if you're playing a combo deck and you just kill them, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense.
I don't think they could have printed. I'm trying to find a way that they could have printed this.
Okay.
Maybe make it cost way more. So like, but it doesn't matter because then everything's free.
Okay, so there has been effects in regular Hearthstone that say your next spell will cost health, for example. So
that's one singular.
So, look, hold on. Can you relax? I'm giving you the history here.
Okay.
So that's the example, right? They had Blood Blue, which is a good example. One card that costs health instead of mana. Very, very strong card at some point during
Wild.
I think that's more balanced. It was one-time effects for sure. I do agree with you. You still could cheat out like quite a good card with Blood Blue. It's not to say that it was bad whatsoever. But the problem with Shrine to Herik, and this is an interaction that they have changed somewhat recently, is that if you got your hero to go immune, the cost of your life to cast the spell was negated. So
are you serious? That's so crazy.
That was an interaction that works. And the reason why it was so interesting is because we have a conversation sometimes off stream about like, custom games, whatever. Hearthstone does a Tavern Brawl called Blood Magic, and it's literally this card. All spells from the start of your game cost health instead of mana. That Tavern Brawl is Yu-Gi-Oh! That's what that game is.
Literally.
If you go first, the game is over. And before, you used to have that interaction of if your hero goes immune, you wouldn't have to worry about any life. You just cast as many spells as you possibly could as long as you're immune. They've actually changed that. And now with the Tavern Brawl that was preemptively, it was like 2 weeks ago, with that change is a lot more interesting because now you have to think about like how you're going to mitigate the life loss.
Sure.
But obviously, based on what I'm saying, is absolutely disgusting. Fun fact for you though, they did print this card, but a completely different effect, and I'm going to explain why.
Okay.
You can read it.
Spirit of the Bat, 2 mana for an 0/3, stealth for 1 turn. After a friendly minion dies, give a minion in your hand plus. This is not the same card.
It's not the same card. But hold on. A while ago, we did a video called, remember Rostacon's Rumble, like the worst expansion in Hearthstone?
Oh, yeah.
Tyreek is the 8 mana 1/1 bat. I don't know if you remember who he is. He was the shittiest Warlock legendary I think I've ever seen.
I think you put that in the thumbnail, I think, if I recall.
Maybe.
Yes. I think this card sounds familiar. Yeah.
That is the spirit of, they were going for Spirit of Tyreek. They redesigned it to be Spirit of the Bat. Not the same card. I'm not saying it was, but that's the history of this
so
card.
it's just like the naming of the card. If anything.
The naming. Okay.
All right.
That's just to get you started. There is a couple really wacky cards here.
I bet. I will say for like a Tavern Brawl, for like a weekend event, that sounds fun. Like in Master Duel recently, they did a thing where both players just had full power Exodia decks. And you would think that would be like the worst thing ever, but it was actually a lot of fun. I'm not going to lie. All right, what do we got? World Flipper X50. 1 mana for an 0/3. Flip your opponent's screen. Okay, please tell me how this works.
Like imagine you're playing Hearthstone, right?
Okay.
You play this card.
It's like go in Photoshop and just rotate 180.
You just rotate 180. Exactly. That's the game now.
Okay, because like in my mind, I'm thinking there's a world where like you get all your opponent's stuff and they get all your stuff.
No,
right?
It is the actual screen being flipped. It is not.
So it's just
like
the aesthetic of the screen just being flipped. This has like actual well, technically it has gameplay implication if you can't read stuff.
Yeah.
Potentially. Okay. Wow, that's fucking hilarious. So, I wish Yu-Gi-Oh had something like, well, Yu-Gi-Oh's not a digital game, so we couldn't do this, but this is so fucking funny.
So please tell me, do you think why do you think this card was not released?
Gee, I wonder why. But, I'm kind of sad this wasn't released. I feel like for, like, stream moments, this would be so funny that all of a sudden, like, you have to play the game upside down. Like, that's just, like, fucking goofy.
Yeah,
like, it has no bearing or anything, but, like, I don't know. I think for the memes, they should have just released this card. That's my take, though.
So, obviously, they never made an effect like this after. I will give you the note. It was, like, an innovative idea that they were experimenting with a digital card game.
Sure.
As you could probably guess, they didn't want this in I'm going to use quotations here, competitive game. So they never actually released it.
Well, this reminds me of the card. Oh my God. I'm not going to know the name of it, but I'll tell you the effect. It's like, it makes the turn timer like 10 seconds or 15 seconds or something.
Nostormo, yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of this in the sense that it's having like an effect on the game, like mechanically, not necessarily like impacting the board itself, but the fact that like it increases like how quickly you have to play the game so that you have less time to like make decisions. I don't know what like people feel about that card, but I think that card's actually really interesting because like in Yu-Gi-Oh, we can't really do that because obviously we're not like, we don't have like chess timers or anything, right? Not to mention, even if we did, what are we gonna like fast forward the timer, be like, all right, you got to play faster. So I think that card like, in a digital space is very interesting, and this like reminds me of that, where it's like affecting how the game like actually is played, like the game rules themselves, not like other cards necessarily.
People for Nosdormu generally are like kind of okay with it. I think the problem with it specifically when it came to competitive is that you didn't really practice with it. So then when it did randomly show up, it was like my entire strategy's out the gate because I just want to think about what I'm actually going to play optimally. And
I kind of like that though. Like granted, you guys have random effects that like can bring things out. I think it's a little bit different because if you're like intentionally playing that card as like a way to force your opponent to play faster and like make them misplay because they're not playing optimally versus like, oh, you hit it off a random effect And now it's like, now all of a sudden, like you have to start playing faster and like address
Yeah.
that. But I don't know. I kind of like that just as like as a concept, but maybe I'm in the minority on that.
People never played it because it was like an 8. I can't remember. I think it was an 8-mana 8/8. I think that's what the actual.
It's just
like,
not well statted.
So like Rag was the same thing, but it dealt 8 damage at the end of your turn. And Rag was like infinitely better because it actually did something when it entered the board, where like Nos was like whatever effect. The other bigger problem with Nos Dormu was animations, because I actually did a whole video on this talking about how like it ate your time because of animations. And it fed into your opponent's turn as well because of how they did it, so that you could potentially skip your opponent's turn depending on how animations worked. It was like a really janky effect.
That's crazy.
It was a really janky effect. It is no longer in the standard set. And when it was played in competitive, it was only like generated from randomness. There's like really good clips of like, do you know who Life Coach is? Do you know what that is? Maybe I explained this when I showed it to you. But
maybe
there's a Life Coach got his name because actually he was mainly known as Rope Coach, because he would wait until the absolute last moment to end his turn, so he had all the time to think about what he wanted to do, which objectively speaking is a very fine thing to do in a card game if you're trying to win. I get it. The problem is, though, if you're used to playing like that and then Nos Dorma's randomly generated, you just kind of can't play the game anymore because you're not used to it anymore. And I think he lost the game. I'm like 100% sure he lost because of Nos Dorma, because it was randomly generated, because he just didn't know what to do. So like, it's fun for a viewer.
I feel like get good, you know, like if that's the case, like I'm being serious. Like it's like if that happens to you, like if that goes against your play style, that's just how the game is, right? Like I can understand that being frustrating, but you know that card can exist, so like you have to account for that. And I know like you said, like you have a timer in your game that's like very fixed, but like get good. Like I don't know what to say. We have to play like, so in Yu-Gi-Oh, like we don't have timers, right? But like the protocol is to like play at a reasonable pace, in quotes. That's like kind of like how they say. And so if your opponent, like if you're like looking at like a clock or your watch or whatever, and your opponent's taking like 2 to 3 minutes to make a singular move, then you can like call a judge to be like, okay, they're taking way too long, right? So it's like, it's kind of more, it's more like baked into Yu-Gi-Oh that you just kind of have to just like account for the fact that you need to be just like constantly doing things, and you can't just take like 10 minutes to think about one move, right?
Which is fair. In Hearthstone, to be fair, they used to have unlimited time in friendly matches, so that meant you can, in like an actual competitive tournament environment, you can take as long as you want. They changed that.
Oh my god!
They changed that, so you can't. There is a maximum time limit, right? And that's where the rope comes in. So like, it's Nos Dorma is like this weird like line, because I understand your perspective, and I think in like a normal ranked ladder game, it's very funny because it's like, oh my god, like what's happening? But like if $50,000 are on the line and like I'm losing the game because this fucking card is generated. I mean, you can say that for a lot of cards, but
you can say that for a lot of cards, though. Exactly.
I could see that.
And to be fair, that's actually one that you can prepare for encountering, right? Because it's not something that like necessarily affects the board. It's like affecting how much time you have to play. And like, I'm going to take the animation stuff out of it because that's like kind of bullshit, right? But when it comes to like, you can choose to play fast or slow. Like that's something you as a player have agency over, versus they conjure a thing that like just like board wipes you or deals like 8 damage directly to your face. Like that's like, you have no control over that randomness. Right. So I would argue that is actually something you could account for. But again, I'm curious what the comments say about this. I will tell you that they changed Nos Dorma entirely to be that both players have to put it in their deck for the effect to actually activate. So like, there's so rather than being like, if this card's randomly generated, so it's, sorry, I should say it's 2 separate cards. So the one that you know is from Classic. That's the one that just, if it summons, like that's what happens, it starts. The new one that they added, and it is currently in standard, is a 7-mana 8/8, so like better stat line and better mana cost. But it says start of game. If both players have this in their deck, the turn timer is now 15 seconds. So like, like from the start.
Starting from the start.
You don't even have to play it.
Yes.
Oh wow.
So that's what it is now. So I guess from like the design team, they inevitably thought like, this is frustrating for people who like don't play around this at all. And I get your perspective. It's in the game. That's something you could think about, but I could see how frustrating it would be from a competitive standpoint to lose a game because like animations would fuck you.
Auto Pecker 4000. That's me. It's a 1-mana 1/1. Deal 1 damage to any player who mouses over this minion. I love like how creative they're getting with like the digital effects. Like this is cool.
Yes, very cool card.
This seems miserable, but it's interesting because this is another card where theoretically you have like control over this, like what this card does, right? Because like if you know what this card is, like the first time you see this card, you're gonna fall for it and you're gonna like hover over it and then you take a damage, right?
Right.
But then after that, you just never hover over it and it's a 1-mana 1/1 that doesn't do anything. Now it's interesting because I'm thinking about like the combo potential because you could play a deck that's like, like Warlock, right? Warlock wants to have low health. So you could go like Auto Pecker 4000, put your mouse over the thing like a million times, get yourself down to like 0 health or whatever, and then you summon like a bunch of guys for free because you have like low life or whatever.
Yep.
It's absolutely ridiculous, but it's very funny.
I'll break it apart in two. The first part you said, I think this card's hilarious. I actually wish this was in the game. I think it's very funny. I think it's just like, it'd be one of those. It's like the Nostormo thing in reverse. If this was randomly generated and someone moused over it and they took 1 damage, I'd laugh. Like I think that'd be hilarious. But you're right. Like I actually think they removed it because you're describing Molten Giant, which I've showed you before, which is it costs 1 less for each damage you take it. And turn 1, you play the Auto Pecker. You have 2 Molten Giants. It'd be so funny. That
sounds insane.
That would be the metagame, right? I'm not even gonna ask you if they printed another card like this. They did not.
There's no shot.
There's no shot. Very funny card. Okay, here you go. Here's an actual like kind of real one.
This is fun. These are cool. These are fun. All right, Old Town Beggar, 1-mana 1/1. At the end of your turn, you have a 25% chance to draw a card. I love it because they could theoretically have this effect in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Because you would just roll a die for like, you roll a D4 and it's like if you hit a 1 or a 4 or whatever, you draw a card. Would that be played? Probably not, but it's funny. It's funny. I think this effect is like fine in Hearthstone, to be honest. I think this is like, they probably did print this in some capacity.
Okay, so funny enough, this card, we'll go through it. 1-mana 1/1 to have like a 25% chance to draw a card. It doesn't seem inherently broken, but in a game like Classic, if you are lucky enough to constantly hit it, which is like the nature of Hearthstone, right? They lean into the RNG. If you end up drawing like 2 cards from this, it might be the best card in the game. Like unironically.
Sure.
So that is very scary. But the funny thing is they literally in Classic, they print a card that is almost the exact same thing, but arguably better, which is this.
Nat Pagel?
Pagel, yeah.
Okay, 2-mana 0/4. At the start of your turn, you have a 50% chance to draw an extra card, but it's the start of your turn. That's different compared to the end of your turn.
This card was actually nerfed. And it used to say at the end of your turn, you have a 50% chance to draw an extra card. This is the nerf version I'm showing you. Now,
okay.
The reason it was nerfed is because this ended up being an auto include in a ton of different decks because, as you probably know, like you said, at the start versus the end is a drastic difference. And if Nat Pagel drew you 1 card, it was already worth it. And then your opponent now has to put resources into this because if they don't, they're going to lose the draw engine, or you're going to have a potential draw engine, I should say. So this card ended up getting nerfed. And as you could probably guess, the current text meant that it probably didn't see any play, but they basically made Old Town Beggar into an actual card, but it is a legendary, which is important to note. You can only run 1 of.
That's important. Yeah. It's interesting though, because there's weird ways like to have randomness in the game that can be like good or bad, right? Like I think I showed you the card before, and this is like, we refer to Snipe Hunter as like the best worst Yu-Gi-Oh card ever. I'll have you give this a read here real quick for your audience.
You could discard 1 card, then target 1 card on the field, roll a 6-sided die and destroy that target unless you roll a 1 or a 6. I remember this.
So you have a So you have this is like the second video I think you and I did. I showed you this card. So you have a 66% chance to destroy a card at the cost of like losing a card yourself. So it's like 1 card for another, right? But there's that 33% chance that you can whiff. But the thing is with Snipe Hunter, it's like, it's neat because even if you whiff, sometimes you just want to get a card from your hand into the graveyard for some reason or another. So like the destruction of the card is almost just like a bonus if it does pop. Like sometimes you really need it to pop something, and like there's videos of people rolling like 4 6s in a row, and this card's just like the worst card ever. But in a perfect world, if you like pop something and you get something in the graveyard that you already want to be there for like whatever reason, then it's like really good. And so this card actually got limited in Yu-Gi-Oh to a singular copy, which is crazy to think about back in the day. I always think about like cards like this, and then like Nat Pagel, now that you're like showing me, where it's like, at what point is, I'm talking to the Hearthstone player when I'm going to say this, but like, at what point is like randomness like too much where it's like over the edge, right? And it's really interesting to see cards like this where it's like, oh, 50% of the time, Nat Pagel's not going to do jack shit for you. But then the other 50% of the time, it's going to be the dream, and you're going to draw like every turn off of it that he just stays on the board. And it's interesting from the opponent's perspective because it's like, there's a chance he doesn't do anything, right? So do you want to waste resources getting rid of this thing that like has a chance to miss? It's weird.
I forget what the actual like saying is. It's like controlled randomness versus not controlled randomness is really where they draw the line, right? Like you want so like Discover is a really good example of this where it's gonna be random when you play that card, but you understand that before you play the card. So exactly what it's gonna do.
Input randomness versus output randomness.
That's what it is. Where like Nat Pagel is obviously kind of shitty like half the time and it feels horrible. It's not like I would describe it as not great game design. And I think that's where they probably draw the line is like, you don't want a card to feel like this. You would like a card to feel good all of the time and then also be like moderately powerful rather than like half the time it's the greatest card in the world versus like the worst card in the world. And I showed you a card, I've had to show you like Crackle and Implosion, which said they deal 2 to 4 damage or deal 3 to 6.
You showed me Implosion. You showed that was the imps, right?
That one sucks ass because half the time the card feels so miserable and the other time it's like the greatest thing in the world. After that expansion, by the way, they never printed cards like that ever again. So they clearly learned from it.
I'm shocked, truly.
Okay.
I wonder why.
Here is your next one.
Succubus, 2 mana, 4/3, battle cry, discard a random card. Speaking of random, but you're in Warlock, so like you don't care. You probably like want to do that. I don't know. This seems like a Hearthstone card to me.
Okay.
Like this doesn't seem. Why would they not print this? Why would they not print this? This just seems like a very like generic Hearthstone card. It's like overcosted, but you have to like give up an extra card, and it's random what you get rid of. They had to. They didn't print this. Like surely this effect exists in the game. It's just like this. I'm so confused. Why are you showing me this?
Yeah. Why would I show it to you?
I don't.
There's no way you're getting this. I'd be shocked. I'll give you I'll give you a hint. The game is really big in China.
Oh, so it's like a censorship issue?
Yeah, there you go.
No, so I know. So it's very funny you say that because Yu-Gi-Oh recently started getting distributed like in Chinese. Like they printed the cards in Chinese. And this exact same issue has come up where they've had to like, well, Yu-Gi-Oh, God, maybe we have to do a video on this now that I think about it. Yu-Gi-Oh already, when the cards come from Japan to the non-Asian territories, they've already had to censor a bunch of the cards because like Yu-Gi-Oh was like a kid's card game, right? And so they had like all these allusions to like the occult and all these different things, and like some of the women were like scantily clad, like in Succubus's case. And so they've already like censored cards when they come to like the US and like the other like non-Asian territories. But with China, they've had to censor the cards like even more. And some cards that like aren't even censored for us are censored in China for like one reason or another because of like just like their culture and everything. So yeah, I see it. That's why they didn't print it. They had to probably change the art on it to make it like acceptable by like Chinese standards. Am I right?
So this card's a little bit of like a wild case because it actually wasn't classic. This was a real card. And then during the expansion of Sabers of Uldum, I think they changed it. And this is the updated one. But yeah, your reasoning is entirely correct. Like that's exactly what it was. That's what they changed it.
Oh my God. They like literally changed the whole art.
They changed it.
They didn't just like cover her. So like in Yu-Gi-Oh, this is very funny. They literally will sometimes just like cover up like the cleavage or like different body parts. And they call that like acceptable. But they literally changed the entire fucking artwork.
Yeah, they changed it. They actually did it for like I wouldn't say for a lot of cards. I think Fellstalker was like the one exception. I'm looking real fast.
They even changed the name of it too. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's the only, every other one that they changed, it is the word of the exact same. They just decided to change the art. But this one's,
Succubus was in the game, and now Fellstalker's in the game in place of Succubus.
Yes.
Or it might be like an old set now, but
well, it would be in the classic set, but yeah, like I don't even think you can't look up Succubus in the game anymore. Like it is gone.
That's so interesting.
It is
yeah,
gone.
no, it's cool because like again, we have the Yu-Gi-Oh comparison too. So maybe I have to do that video with you one day. That'll be fun.
All right, here's this one.
Look at this. Coming up with more video ideas mid-video. Neztem, King of the Kobolds.
Yeah.
Did I pronounce that right?
Yep.
1 mana, 1/3, battle cry, order your deck by cost, cheapest on top. This is so fucking cool. That's so neat. Cheapest on top. So this is neat. I hope this card's in the game because there's like a lot of cool stuff you could do with this potentially. Even if it's like in a different like iteration. I think this like, again, being able to play off the digital aspect, like I can imagine in Yu-Gi-Oh, sort your deck by attack power. I'm going to take 20 minutes to put like all these cards in order. That would be miserable. be awful. I want this card to be in the game. I think there's a lot of cool stuff you could do with it. So I hope it is in some form.
Why wouldn't you think they would print it though? Let's say, because this card wasn't added to the game.
Why would they, in this version, it's not added to the game?
Yes.
Okay, why would they not add this to the game? There could be like combo potential in my Yu-Gi-Oh brain where it's like you build your deck a certain way that, well, it's cheapest on top. Maybe because like it smooths out your curve too well. And like, then it's just like your deck is like uber consistent and you're not having to worry about like the RNG of like you like being at the mercy of like card draw potentially. Like I could maybe see that, but that seems like a bit much. I don't know if that would matter. You could also just like stack your deck with like particular cards. Like I'm thinking in a world where you just play like this guy and then a bunch of other things that cost certain things so that you guarantee stack like the right things on top. But I think that's cool. Like, I think that's just like a combo piece. And I feel like you guys have had like other combo pieces that are like not exactly this, but like not far off of it either. It's hard for me to see an argument why you can't have this in your game.
So here's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Rogue has a lot of 0 mana cards that are very good. So if you have this card, there's a way that you could probably set it up with like Gadget and Auctioneer, which is that card that draws a card every single time you cast a spell. And therefore you continue
and you
going,
like go infinite.
Like you could probably build up a way for this to be like a really disgusting like setup. I don't know if I would necessarily call it a combo, but like, yeah, like you could set up something really, really gross. I'm not sure what the steps are to like achieve like a ginormous Edwin or whatever they're going for, but they probably tested it and realized in certain classes, this might be a little bit too gross. Also,
do you think that's the case? I don't know. Like, I feel like you've shown me more degenerate stuff than this. Like, it seems like a lot of hoops.
The other argument for it is that this is a 1 mana 1/3, and maybe this is just what they were testing it at. If you play this on turn 1, depending on how your curve looks, you kind of have it set up until like the late game. And
right, which is what I was kind of alluding to.
That's that's probably a little bit too good. It's also just like, do you want a card like this in the game that makes every single game feel exactly the same way? Because if I draw this on turn 1, you know how the game's going. But regardless of how we feel about it, they did print a card that is unironically this, but reverse, which is this.
Lorekeeper Polkelt, 4 mana 4/5 battle card. Reorder your deck from the highest cost card to the low. Okay, so it's like you said, it's the opposite. Okay.
So this one was printed, and this, well, I don't know if I've actually showed you this card before. How do you think this card was? No. How do you think this card was in Hearthstone?
Generic legendary. I'm thinking because like I know that the giants exist that like I imagine that, okay, I guess here's like a weird question. The giant doesn't get the mana reduction until it's in your hand, right? When it's in your deck, it still costs like 1 billion.
Yes.
Because like in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if you're playing the giants in your deck, you play this guy, and then it's like you stack the giants to the top of your deck, and then like you can just start dropping the giants potentially. That's like the first thing that comes to mind.
The mana reduction does not count in your deck for giants, if that's what you're going for.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So that I see like you being able to do that, which is kind of cool. But it's weird because if you play this on 4 and you have like 8 or 9 drops in your deck that don't have like mana reduction, that they're not necessarily good. But there could be like, I think there are some combos that this card could enable. So I could maybe see it being good, but it's like very specific, I feel like.
Okay. This card was very good.
Really? Okay.
So not only the giants is like an interesting angle. There is just a lot of ways to manipulate your knowing what your next like 6 draws are going to be is fantastic. And I'm sure in Yu-Gi-Oh, if you had the opportunity, you probably would do it as well. Like lining up your next draws is great. There's also just a lot of ways for classes to like draw and give like mana reduction to what you're drawing towards. So example, there's a card called it's called Galakron for Rogue. It's a whole thing. But basically, if you got it to the max thing, it would draw your 4 cards and they would cost 0. So you could go like Polkelt into that. And next thing you know, you just absolutely explode on your opponent because all your cards cost 0 mana. It was, in a lot of cases, this card was very good. Like anything that could set up any combo deck. Just knowing what your draws were, that's what made it great. And looking at Nestim, which is the reverse, it's kind of the same logic, but I actually think like what we were saying with like you set up your next draws for throughout the game is probably what they were trying to avoid. That sounds worse than what Lorekeeper Polkelt did in Hearthstone. I'd rather have variants.
You have to do more work with Polkelt because of the fact because it's highest to lowest instead of lowest to highest. Where Nestem is just like, all right, here's the next 7 turns like just laid out for you, and you don't even have to think.
Yes.
Right. And that I could see that being like very boring from that respect. Doppelganger, 5 mana, 3/7. Battlecry, copy the text box of a friendly minion. Copy the text box of a friendly minion. That's really interesting. So obviously that wouldn't really apply to anything with a battle cry, because I imagine it would already be in play. So that wouldn't trigger, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So, and the battlecry minions are typically pretty good in Hearthstone, but there could be other fun stuff you could copy that's like, oh, end of turn, like deal a bunch of damage, or I don't know, something else that it's weird because there's things that could be really good, and then there's like a lot of things that are really bad. I think they could print this. I'm trying to think like why they wouldn't. I guess the reason that they wouldn't is that like maybe there's just so many things that like this doesn't work with, or maybe it's just like hard to intuit what would work and what wouldn't. So maybe they just didn't want to print it because it was like confusing. Okay. Because it's like, oh, you might think it works this way, but it actually doesn't. But I don't know. I feel like they could print this card in some form.
Okay, so this one is actually extremely interesting considering in Classic we have this card, which I don't know if I've shown you this card before, but you could make the case that it's almost 1-to-1 with.
Faceless Manipulator, 5 mana, 3/3, battlecry, choose a minion and become a copy of it. Yeah, like that's basically the same thing. The difference is that like the stats might be different.
Yes.
Because obviously this is only copying the text box.
So I think what ends up happening here is just like you said, like intuitively, like how does this interact if I bounce this to my hand? What happens? Right. What happens if I shuffle it back into my deck? Right? Does it just become the card? Probably would, but then you start asking a lot of questions on how mechanically it would work. But also, sure. Does this card need to exist if Faceless Manipulator already exists?
That's a fair point. I mean, I have two thoughts on this. So one, there's all the weird interactions with it, but like as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, and maybe this is like a Yu-Gi-Oh specific problem, there's so many times where like there's a card that interacts in just like a really weird way. But the thing is, because you're a digital client, all of that stuff would be cemented into the code. Where like in Yu-Gi-Oh, especially when a card is first released, people have to kind of figure it out based off of like the way that like the cards are worded and just the way the mechanics work. But then sometimes like judges have to like make posts or whatever saying that like, oh, this card works this way. And that's like how it works. It's interesting that like this shouldn't be that big of an issue because you're in a digital client. And then to your argument about if Faceless Manipulator exists, why do you need Doppelganger? There's plenty of times in Yu-Gi-Oh where they release like a duplicate of a card that's a different name but has like a very similar effect, just to have like more redundancy, right? Because then if you're playing Hearthstone, you can play like the copy deck where everything's like copying everything.
Oh, that's fair.
You know, maybe that's fun, right? So I see the point. Like if we already have this, why do we need more of it? But as someone who's played Yu-Gi-Oh for like 20 plus years, we have plenty of cards that basically do the same thing in a different way, but it kind of like almost is a good thing in a sense. Granted, your guys' deck size is lower, so maybe that could be more oppressive potentially, but I don't know. I don't see any issue with them printing this. Like I think having more copies of this is like fine.
So I'm trying to think of like where this would be broken, because Faceless Manipulators, again, like if it copies the stats, it's almost a positive rather than a negative. I'm just trying to think of like where this would be a huge issue. I've actually no idea why this would be a problem. Maybe it's just because they don't, like you're making the case that like you want more redundancy, but maybe they don't want this to be a very common thing. Maybe they want this to be limited. Also, this card kind of suffers from like, it's a legendary, but B, the cost is super weird. Because if this is too weak, what's the point? But if they make it cheaper, is it too good? Now they printed later on in Hearthstone, they printed a 4-mana 3/3, which is the same thing as Faceless Manipulator, but the stats stay as a 3/3 rather than whatever the stats are. So
okay,
it's
clearly they printed that. I mean,
well, that's the future, right? It's interesting why they wouldn't want to print it at this case. But I have actually no idea. This one didn't seem that broken to me either. Okay.
No, that seems fine. It seems like a neat card. Enigma the Sphinx, 6 mana, 6/6. Whenever a player draws a card, they draw from their opponent's deck. Holy shit. That's very interesting. Why would they not want to print this? Because it's like, theoretically, you could do this in Yu-Gi-Oh! It'd be very annoying, but you could do it in Yu-Gi-Oh! You just have to make sure you give them the stuff back. What would be the problem with this? I guess the biggest issue is that it skips like their draw for turn. Like we have some cards in Yu-Gi-Oh that say if your opponent were to like draw a card or add a card from deck to hand, except during their draw phase. Like that's a common restriction where it's like they don't mess with the draw phase specifically. So maybe like that's an issue because it's like you play this and now all of a sudden you get their next card like guaranteed. That's assuming they don't do anything else. Like that could be annoying because it's sort of like draw locking them. And like obviously I showed you like Yata Garasu and Yu-Gi-Oh where like draw locking is just like not okay. So I could liken it to that, and I could see why that would be a problem.
You're not locking the draw though, right? Because you just draw from your opponents if this was on board, right? That's a weird card.
I was gonna say that's basically draw locking them anyway, because in your game you have like classes, and I'm thinking about in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're playing against like a deck that has like 0 synergy with your deck, like so as basically anything that's not the mirror match, then you're basically drawing a card that does nothing, but it's like equals a card in terms of like you could like discard it or do something with it. Unless you're really lucky and you hit something generic that like is useful to you, which in Hearthstone you guys have a lot of very like generic type effects, even if they're locked behind different classes and such. Where Yu-Gi-Oh! I think it's a bit more strict in that regard.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
I think it's just like I think it's just like it's annoying more than anything. Like, and maybe they just don't want like this type of effect in the game.
Okay.
But
so that's really interesting. So the question is, do you think they printed a card later on that is almost
with
the
this
exact
type of effect?
With this type of effect, yeah.
I feel like it's in your game, it's a lot easier to do something like this. Just because it's like all automated. There's not like any confusion in that regard. It's more so like, do they want the effect in the game from like a player perspective? Like, is this like fun or interesting or good for the game? And then anytime they would draw from the opponent's deck. So they're not drawing their own cards. This is tough. This might be the hardest one you've shown me, to be honest.
Yeah, I get you. It's an interesting one.
It's an enigma, you could say. Ha ha ha. That's a knee slapper right there.
Oh my God.
I think inherently there's nothing wrong with this card, but I feel like it would just be a headache to play against this card. Because I feel like people want to like draw their own cards with their own deck that synergizes with their own thing. And this sort of like tilts it on its head.
There's a lot of pros and cons on the card like this, I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah.
But the more I think about it, the more you're speaking, I actually like it a lot more. I like the fact how in Hearthstone, one of the biggest problems we have in this game is interaction. Like if a combo is easy to set up, like how can we stop our opponents from playing it? There's a few ways.
This is a way to interact with it.
This is right. Like you could play this on the board. You could save your draw and then hope you hit their combo piece, right? And then it's like, oh, now I'm in the game, which is like a really cool mechanic to have. It's also just not like a super broken stat line. It's just kind of whatever. It just sits on the board. It actually adds a lot of interesting decisions to make. Do I want to draw extra cards for my opponent's deck to make them mill more? Would I rather like the rest of my deck in an aggro deck is absolute trash? Would I rather draw from my opponent's deck? Like there's a lot of interesting lines that can be taken here. Now, granted, this has to be on board. It's not for the rest of the game, which means if your opponent doesn't want this, they just remove it because it's only a 6/6. So it is a cool line. Which is why they actually printed
it.
They didn't print it 1-to-1. This is probably the closest you're gonna get here.
Okay. Tony, King of Piracy. 5 mana, 4/6. Both players' decks are swapped. Finale, draw a card. It's not exactly the same, but I get what you're saying.
So
yeah,
I think they did this specifically because of what you said earlier. Like it is kind of a headache to think about how you're going to interact with your opponent's deck. Like if this is on board, like you have to constantly remember like, oh, I'm drawing from like my opponent's side. It's also animation wise. How is that looking consistently? Does it make it look really awkward? How do you end up drawing cards?
It'd be so funny seeing a card going from your opponent's deck to your hand or whatever. Like that'd be kind of fun.
So it is, you know, what's funny is they even printed that effect like somewhat recently.
Do they really?
Yeah. But it's funny. A one-time thing. You can only do it once now.
Sure.
I would imagine when they made Enigma, it was just the current design team thinking like, this is not something we want in the game. 5 years later, when they printed this card, this is a completely new design team that thinks that this is completely fine. Now, the question is, do you think Tony got nerfed?
Well, before I get to that, it's interesting because it's like Tony sort of does what Enigma does, but it does it like all at once, right? It's like they're different cards, yes, but it kind of achieves a lot of the objectives of Enigma, but just like it's just like, okay, you're swapping the decks like that's it, right? That's just like how the game goes. Do I think this got nerfed, you said?
Yes.
How would they nerf this? Make it cost more? That's usually like the go-to. Maybe it's like both players' decks are swapped like temporarily. I could see them nerfing it, but I'm very curious to know how they would nerf it.
Okay. So
I'll go with yes. I need an answer. I'll go with yes.
This card. So when this card came out in standard, really cool design card. It wasn't inherently broken. It didn't feel that bad to play against. The problem is that there were combos that you could do with this that made this card unkillable, so that you would go through your deck, swap them, your opponent's drawing nothing, they couldn't interact with this. It was just GG. And that's basically what it came down to. There's also some stuff in Wilds, But no one cares about wilds, let's be honest here. Anyways, this is what they nerfed it to.
It's very funny because I may or may not be showing you this in a future video that may be coming out. Something similar to this. Anyway.
Swapping your deck.
7 mana. 7 mana. Replace your deck with a copy of your opponent's deck. Okay, that's something that I've seen multiple times where it's like always, instead of the actual thing, it's like a copy of the thing.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not as good, though.
It's absolutely...
That's a lot worse.
It's absolute garbage. Yeah, it's no longer the same card.
That's like unplayable. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they killed him. It is what it is. Oh,
that sucks.
Oh, well.
That sucks.
I mean, no, like...
Do people, like, hate this card?
The combo you could do was pretty frustrating. Like, there was a card called the Jailer, which destroyed your deck, made all your minions immune, which meant the only way you could actually interact with Tony or the Jailer was you needed, like, an AoE. But that wasn't very common, and there wasn't a great way of dealing with the whole board if you were... It also, just to be honest with you, was too slow. So, and you're playing this combo in Druid, by the way, so you're ramping faster than your opponent. You have consistency, whatever. So they had to do something. They also nerfed both of them at the same time. They didn't want the Jailer to be in the game because of just that effect alone is kind of weird. Also there's a card in Wild called Bulf Ram Shield, which is when your hero would take damage, this takes it instead. So you could see the interaction with Jailer if like this would never die and therefore like the game would never be over. So yeah, that's probably
that seems miserable.
It was quite fun when it was in standard. Here is the next card.
What the hell? Devil Sword Giant is a 50 mana 8/8. Cost reduced by the total attack of minions you've summoned this game. Interesting. A total attack of minions you've summoned this game. There is a world where you could make this very cheap. Just keep playing a bunch of shit. And then you could also buff the stuff and then it gets really big. I feel like they probably released a version similar because like they have other like mana reduction stuff before, you know.
They have had
with giants. Yeah. It is a giant too. It's a Devil Sword Giant.
I'm trying to...
But they didn't print it though.
They didn't print it.
Why would they not print it?
I think inherently it is, a lot of it came down to like summoning. That's an interesting one. It's also how it interacts with specific cards. There's a card in the game called the Darkness, which is a 4 mana 20/20. So like already right there, it's like...
Yeah, but that's a combo. Like, okay, so what? Like you played that card. That's fine.
I think Hearthstone was really trying not to just have straight out blowout games where it's like, if you had this opening hand and your opponent just like you had no answer, you just lost. I feel like that's not great game design. Inherently speaking though, this card's dog. Like this is a horrible card. This is unplayable garbage for the most part. It is, I would like... In context here, Mountain Giant, if I'm Warlock on the coin and I tap for turn 2, right? I get to play this like turn 4, turn 3, depending on what the game state is. So I'm getting a turn 4. Let's just say on average, you're getting a turn 4, 8/8. When are you playing this? Well,
so in my mind, because like you're asking if they like printed this like later, I could see them printing something like this, but not costing 50 mana, right? Like if it costs, I don't know, 30 or something, then like maybe you can have those like turn 5, turn 6 turns where you can just drop this guy and he's like super cheap. Maybe. I don't know, because especially because you said the Darkness or whatever is a 4 mana 20/20, then like there you go, right? You play your Darkness on turn 4, that makes this guy basically cost 0 if it's like half the cost it currently is. You're showing me, then like you get to play this guy next turn, right? So like I don't know, like I could see a world that this exists with it being like modified.
Yeah, it's interesting. To be honest with you, this one always like thinking on it, I have no idea. The only thing that comes to my head, because you're right, 50 cost is horrible. Like there's no way they could always reduce it. This is my only reason I think they wouldn't print this card. Is potentially for this high roll, because
draw a card and deal. Yeah, okay.
Maybe
I can see
you just
that.
one shot your opponent, and like you're like, what the just happened? I don't know. Card
that I could see. I could see.
Yeah, in the current state, it is absolutely unplayable. I just thought it would be really interesting to show you. Okay.
Alec the Boy Scout. It's me. 5 mana 4/5. Pick 3 extra cards when you build your deck. Battle Cry, discover one of them. Okay, so let me ask this. So these cards don't go into your deck. They're like off to the side.
So I would imagine the way that they would do this is when you put this in the deck building screen, like it would highlight like 3 empty slots. You would pick 3 cards from your collection to put into those slots. And then when you play this card in game, it would show you those 3 cards.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like kind of like your sideboarding.
Right, like you're sideboarding, but it's like in the middle of the game.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting effect. I think it would still probably apply where you can't play more than 2 copies of a card, if I had to guess. So it's not like you get extra versions of something.
I would agree with that, yeah.
you play this, you're purposefully picking 3 cards in your deck you would want to see, which given you playing this, they'd have to be like either, it's one of 2 camps. Either all 3 cards are just so generic that they're like applicable in like a lot of cases and it's just very board dependent. Like that one card you told me where you fucking just cheat out like the Reddit custom card of your dreams or whatever. Or it's like a combo enabler where like you're picking specific cards that you're looking for a combo, and this like guarantees you hit one, and then you just need like the other one. So it's kind of like a consistency booster in that sense. I don't know. This is like, I feel like they probably don't want to mess with the like deck building because it's like a little bit of extra work in that regard. But like aside from that, I actually think this is really neat. I think there's like a lot of cool stuff you could do with this. I think it could be very also frustrating potentially on like how degenerate it gets. But I think like they could do something like this.
Okay. Do you think it would be good?
Do I think it'd be good? At 5 mana, maybe not. I think it'd have to be maybe a bit cheaper because you'd probably want to like play the card immediately. Or if it's a combo piece, then like you're okay probably waiting. But if it's something you really need like in that moment, it's like, oh, here's my like Swiss Army knife toolbox of cards that this guy can get me. I need like this one in this instant, right? I feel like you'd want to play this guy, get that thing, and then play that thing more often than not. So I think like I said, I think they could print this. I think not in this exact form. I think they'd have to make it cheaper, most likely.
Okay. You know what's crazy, dude? Is you exactly right?
Whoa! That's awesome. 4 mana, 4/4 ETC band manager. While building your deck, assemble a band of 3 cards and discover one. That's awesome.
So this card actually, this card just rotated. I would say...
Was it good?
This card was one of... I wouldn't call it like the greatest card ever, but it was put into a lot of decks. Like it was,
sure.
I think just the concept alone of it was so unique in Hearthstone because like, you know, you guys have sideboarding. Like I've talked to CGB about. We don't. We have nothing, right? So this is like the first instance of that. There's also a lot of really cool interactions with this. There's cards that say like if a card, replay every card that didn't start in your deck. So this card, the cards in your ETC don't actually start in your deck, which means if you generate the one you want specifically, because you don't have to just discover it randomly, you could actually pick the card, then you can interact with that card. And then that enables a lot of stuff. Also, it might protect you from like your opponent trying to grief you. For example, you have a really important spell. Now it's hidden behind a band manager so that you can play it when you want it. Really cool card. And mainly this was used for though is like tech cards, right? If you needed a specific card in a matchup, you would hold it behind the ETC. But if like you didn't need a tech card, you would just put like another value generator or something along those lines.
Right. I like that. Yeah, it's like
cool card.
Magic has, from I think what CGB has shown me, like cards that like mid game you can take stuff like out of your sideboard and like play it or put it into your hand or whatever. And that's kind of crazy to me because like Yu-Gi-Oh has never had anything like that. But it's essentially like that concept for Hearthstone, but you guys don't even have sideboarding, period. Like you guys, if I understand, I think like when you guys play competitively, you bring like multiple decks, right? That's how it works.
Yeah, so we had a format called Specialist, which was, you're going to have to tell me how you guys run your tournaments, but the way Specialist worked was you had your 30 cards, but you bring 3 different versions of this one deck depending on what you're going up against. So you could swap in between each match. If like, let's say you're going against a slower deck, you don't need as much removal. You're playing the same deck with like slightly different cards. And
so you could play like, hypothetically, you could play like Freeze Mage, Mech Mage, and then some other mage, and then like pick between the 3.
It would be Freeze Mage, like the most generic version of it because you need to be good against everything or like try to be good against everything. Then it'd be like Freeze Mage against Control or Freeze Mage against Combo. So like you could decide how greedy you want to be or how much draw you want it to be. That was a format. That format was awful to watch because it was like,
understandably,
if there was one deck that was just like the best, that's what everyone brought.
That's all everyone was playing.
It was super boring to watch. How does it work in Yu-Gi-Oh? Do you guys only bring one deck, I'm assuming?
Yeah, we bring one deck and then we have a 15 card side deck similar to Magic where in between for games, we play best 2 out of 3 for each round. So like games 2 and 3, you can swap in and out any cards that you wish. And typically people aren't really citing consistency boosters, like in the sense of like the special, like whatever format you were just talking about. Like typically you're side decking like silver bullet type cards to stop the opponent from doing stuff or stuff that's going to like guarantee that your stuff goes through, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Kind of just depending on the circumstance. Yeah.
I got you. Okay. Yeah, that's what it is in Hearthstone. Okay, what about this one?
Katharina Winterwisp. This is a 5 mana 5/5 battle cry. Set each player to 5 mana crystals. I'm assuming that is just permanent, that they're just stuck there.
I'm going to assume that you get the mana crystal after each turn, because Hearthstone, you get a mana crystal up to a cap of 10. So I'm going to assume you still get it.
Right. So this is setting you back to both players, excuse me, back to 5, but then like you're re-ramping back up to 10.
Yeah, you would have to go through the motions of getting back up to 10 mana. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Because it's interesting. You could go either way, right? It could be like you're at 5 and you're at 5 for the whole game potentially.
That would be okay. If you're gonna read it like that, that is an interesting line. That if that's how you're reading it, I'm almost 100% sure that's why they didn't print it.
Probably. Like that was my first thought of why they never printed this. But if you both set to 5 and you reaccumulate the crystals like you normally would at each turn, that's interesting, right? Because then it almost becomes it's like an anti-druid tech in a way, right? Because then it's like, okay, druid ramped like 2 or 3 times. I can play this, and now we're both set back to 5, so it almost evens out the playing field a bit. But that could also feel bad then for the druid player, because you played all these cards to like ramp, and then like they effectively like didn't do anything. I mean, that's also like a card game at the end of the day too. Like stuff just gets invalidated. So I don't know. I think this is really interesting for like druids specifically because of the ramping. It's like a neat like anti-druid card that it like sort of like resets you so that they're not so far ahead that they're able to play like their giant things. Similar to like Magic and like other games where like you have resources. I feel like people really hate when you like destroy the resources themselves. Just like that's just like a feels bad, and people just don't like that generally. So like going from like 10 to 5, I could see even if your deck is like fine with that, I could feel like people would just hate to have to play with this type of card. But I could see the application for it. I think it's actually kind of cool.
Do you think they printed it? So
I'm on two minds of this. I feel like yes, they could print this, but I feel like a lot of people would really hate this effect. But it's only really good, like, that I'm thinking about it. Like, no other class really ramps, right? It's like just Druid.
During the time this would have been printed, yes. Yeah, that's the answer, yeah. Now it's a little different, yeah.
It's like, I'm trying to think of like if you're playing other matchups, like how good this is. Like, I don't know if we're going to go with this being a hunter card specifically, but it's like against control, it's interesting because control like wants to go into the late game and have all that mana available to them to do a bunch of things, right? So then it's like an anti-combo card in a sense, because if they need 10 mana to like do their combo, this kind of like resets that, right? If you're going up against like a non-combo deck, if it's just like control and they want to have all that mana, then again, you're sort of like almost as like an aggro player in a way, like you don't really care because your curve is so low comparatively. I want to say like they should print this, but I feel like so many people would just like hate playing against this card because I feel like it would just feel so bad to play against.
Okay.
So I'm going to say no, but I kind of hope they did.
They did.
They did.
They printed it as a 6 mana neutral. Now, you're talking specifically to counter Druid Ramp, which I guess is like a good strategy. The main reason this was played was because if your opponent was going for like a 9 mana card and you set their mana crystals at 5, you just fucked their entire game plan. And now they're waiting 4 more turns to get to that position, and then they're behind. So that's what this card was used for, to stop your opponent from playing a big card that could basically win you the game.
Was it good?
That's an interesting conversation because I feel like you don't see this card unless it's absolutely necessary. So I'm going to go with like, it was like super tech. Like it wasn't a very common thing. But when you did lose to it, oh my God, it felt so bad. Because
this would be infuriating to lose to, yeah.
But I wouldn't count it like broken. I think it was rated competitive for a little bit, just because of like what the metagame was. But they did make it though at 6 mana.
So it's almost like if there's a metagame that has a lot of like late game threats, this is a good card to sort of just like delay that or maybe like give you an edge in that regard.
So if you're like the best example I give you is like if you're a mid-range deck and you know that the only way you're losing is your opponent getting to enough mana crystals to kind of just go around the corner, and you drop Zihi, it's like they are so delayed, it's insane. And then now you can just kind of take over the game because they need those mana crystals to actually catch back up, and you didn't give them the opportunity to.
Crafty Blacksmith, 3 mana, 3/4, Battlecry. Discover a weapon. If your opponent guesses your choice, they also get it. What the fuck? This is really cool. This is neat. Okay, so shows you a bunch of weapons. You both get to see them. And then if they also pick, they also get it. So you still get it, though. It's not like it like
you always get it. You always get it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What an interesting design. So there's a 33% chance that they get the weapon. But it's interesting because then there's the mind game of, okay, you see 3 weapons. If your opponent, like, your opponent's going to think like the obvious choice, like, is what you're going to go for. You can intentionally go for like the second best weapon because you want to make sure you get it and they don't. Or do you even care? Like, do you just like not care and you just take the best weapon anyway and just deal with the fact that they also get it if they pick it right?
Yep.
That's an interesting question. You're giving them something for free. It's a weapon, so they can actually like attack immediately. I guess the only reason that they wouldn't print this in my mind is because your opponent has to like do something during the not their turn, right? And it's not like automated. So that would be like my thinking for why they wouldn't print something like this. Because I don't feel like there's many effects in Hearthstone that are like that, unless you can correct me.
No. There's no cards.
Right. It's like usually when it's your turn, you're doing everything. And like the only real interaction is like triggers, like death rattles or like secrets or whatever. Yeah. I feel like to me, that's the reason why they didn't print this card, if I had to guess. So because then it's like your opponent has to do something. I
think you are entirely right. But years went by and they actually printed cards like this. And funny enough, that is one to one, literally like, well, maybe not the exact text, but that's what it is. They also printed this one.
Okay.
And then they also printed this one.
Wow, they just leaned into it.
So this was, they had a set called Murder at Castle Nathria, which was like kind of like a murder mystery set. So I guess it kind of fit the flavor of it, of like a suspicious thing, like thinking of like the clues, right? That's kind of what the point of it was. So the way that this works in game is you would pick your spell, or you pick your legendary minion, or you pick your weapon. And then at the very start of your opponent's turn, and yes, this does count for their time during their turn, they have to pick one. And depending on what they pick, they would get it immediately, just like you. You could also interact with your opponent in a very interesting way. You could actually, like, I'll use the Alchemist because it's the most applicable to this. You pick your spell, you could transform the Alchemist, and therefore they don't actually get to get the decision anymore. So it doesn't matter.
Interesting.
And these cards were really fun because, like you said, like almost one to one, like you would think about, what is my opponent going to think about?
Yeah.
And which one are they going to pick? And that was always like a fun mini game. Now the question is,
I'm very much fan of like game within a game mechanics.
I'm right there with you. I'm an absolute ginormous fan of it. Which one of these do you think was the best?
The best? Well, okay, wait, here's a question I have though. If you like, okay, let's say you go Suspicious Pirate and you get your weapon. You said they don't pick until the start of the next turn, right?
Correct.
If you play that weapon, then like technically they know which weapon you picked and then they can get it.
Yes.
Okay. But because then you can mind game them, right? Because then you could play like a different weapon or a different spell, and then they might not think that that's like, maybe if that was one of the choices,
so
right? Then you could like really mind game them. That's
they're back. I'm very confident in this. If I'm wrong, then I'm sorry. But when you used to generate a card, it wouldn't tell you what it was from. Like it used to just be like this, they played this card. Nowadays, it'll be like, let's say you're picking from the Alchemist, it'll be created by Suspicious Alchemist. So you would know what they picked, where before it wouldn't. I almost wish for these specific cards, they like,
didn't say.
It hit it.
Yeah.
But
they need to obfuscate the information. Yeah.
Then I think it's just like clarity and consistency. And like, then you have people like, where did they get this from? So that's probably why they didn't do it.
Okay. Which of these was the best? I want to say it's either the Usher or the Alchemist just because they're so cheap.
Okay.
I think the Legendary Minion one is, I feel like it might be like too high rolly, like, but the spell, I think I want to go with the Alchemist. I don't know.
Yeah, you're correct.
Yeah. It just seems like generally that would make sense. The Legendary one seems like the gambit's too wide of like things being bad that you can pull. From Beyond, a cool name. 1 mana for a spell, I'm assuming. Draw 3 cards at the end of your turn, discard them. I mean, Yugioh, this would be broken. I've basically shown you this card. I've literally like shown you this exact card in Yugioh. And it's very good. And I feel like this card would also be very good, especially because it discards the cards. So if there's things that have like discard triggers, that's pretty insane. So yeah, I can see why they didn't print this.
Okay, now the question is, because I agree with you, this was obviously would have been an insane card. Do you think they printed it? At some point,
they would have had to do something to this. I feel like this is too good for 1 mana. They would have had to either like make this cost way more or have some other restriction on it, or like maybe it doesn't discard the cards. Maybe it like, I don't know what your like exile or like banish is, but maybe it like doesn't discard them specifically. Like maybe that's something you could do. But 1 mana draw 3 just sounds so good.
I will say, for all intents and purposes, exiling and discarding are like the same thing in Hearthstone, right? Because we don't have the graveyard, so it's virtually the exact same thing. But
yeah, I want to say they did not. Oh, go ahead.
Funny enough, they did 1-1.
1-1, really?
Literally 1-1. Temporary
is it good?
Simo. Come on.
I'm just asking. At least they made it a legendary. At least they made it a legendary.
Yeah, that's probably the most important thing here is that it ended up being a legendary.
Not having multiples, I think, is important.
And it's funny because you even brought up like the discard like thing. That was actually kind of a real thing in specific decks. Like if you can,
I'm the Yu-Gi-Oh player.
There you go.
I have to think of that. The problem with cards like this is that, and this is like the pot of greed problem. It's like, why would you not play this card in every deck essentially?
Exactly.
And that's like, that was be my reasoning for why they wouldn't print it, is because they realized this card's so good that every deck is going to play it. So why would we bother when like it makes like deck building less, it makes it more homogenized, right? Because then it's like, okay, start of my deck. I'm playing Warlock. I'm going to play the Solarium. Like I don't even think about it, right? That's kind of boring. And so that's like the reason why stuff like that. I could see why they wouldn't print it for that reason, but they printed it. All right, whatever. Sonya Shadow Dancer, 2 mana, 3/2 stealth. Your hero looks. Wait, hold on. Your hero looks like a different class's hero until your first turn. That's really interesting.
So mechanically, let me explain how this works. You know when you queue up for a game, I don't know. You probably I know you've seen it at some point because you used to play Hearthstone, where it goes like Jaina versus like Anduin, and then you know it's mage versus priest. What would happen is if I'm going against the mage, they would think that I am like a warrior, but in fact I am the priest. So they're gonna mulligan for warrior rather than priest. Now, priest is probably the worst example because who gives a fuck what they're doing? But you know what I mean? Like you
also have a mulligan in your game, and that's important.
Yeah,
like,
so you can change your perspective based on, or you change your mulligan in your opener based on what class you think you're going up against because of like the meta read. So that's what that's.
Would you get to pick the class, or is it random?
I'm going to imagine it's going to be random. I don't think they would have the menu for this. Yeah, I would think they wouldn't have a menu for this. But it would be interesting because like if you got to pick, then you would just pick the most common class.
Sure.
So that they would always mulligan for it. Like it would be really interesting.
Okay, so like this is like a at the beginning of the game type of effect that this happens.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. That's really interesting. Because like you said, you have a mulligan, and it's like you said, like you're mulliganing for different like matchups, right? Where again, like in Yu-Gi-Oh, you get your opening 5, like regardless of what deck you're playing, that's what you get. So like we would never really have anything like this, but funny enough, there is something similar that people can do. If you like have your like extra deck of cards, right? And it's like maybe you don't care about your extra deck that much for your deck. Hypothetically, like if you just like accidentally drop a card and it's like, oh, I'm playing this deck, right? And then it's like you're playing something completely different. Like you can kind of do that, but like that's like against the rules. You're not supposed to technically do that. So not encouraging anyone to do that, but like people have tried that before, and they had to like codify that you can't do that. Just to misrepresent, because your opening play, depending on a deck, like if you're like, oh, I'm playing this deck, right? I might be like, oh, I'm going to do something different for my opening play then, right? So that actually matters quite a bit. It's really, the mulliganing thing is really interesting because it's only until the first turn. But it's also like if you go, because the mulligan happens before anything would happen, and then like you would reveal that you're a different hero. I kind of like the like little mini game that this creates. Like obviously you don't really have much counterplay to it because like if you mulligan for something that's not the class, like you don't get like a second mulligan or anything. So like you kind of get punished for it, but like I kind of like that in a way. Like that's very roguey in its like design. I feel like that's a very rogue type of effect. I don't know. I hope this card's in the game. Like I don't know if it would be good necessarily, but like I think it's a cool concept.
Okay, so do you think they printed an effect like this?
I hope they did. I really hope they did.
Okay, you're right. They did.
They did.
But
that's so cool.
This one mechanically is slightly different because it's not just for the first turn, it's until you play a rogue
until you play a
card.
rogue card. That actually is way better then because you could like keep obfuscating like what your class is from multiple turns potentially if you're playing a bunch of neutral stuff. I think that's actually a lot better. I think that's cool.
There's actually a lot of really interesting interactions with this card. One of them, this was actually in a tier 1 deck, not because necessarily the effect, but the way that this would work is that if you play any card that is neutral, it wouldn't change your class. So you could actually discover cards from your temporary class, which was
that's cool.
Very good. Also, there are cards in Rogue that say something on the lines of if you for every card in your hand that is from a different class, reduce the cost of this. or whatever.
Oh, so it's synergized with that.
So it's synergized with that, which they actually had to change because it was too good. And that's one of the reasons why this card wasn't nerfed, but the interaction of like how that interacted with specific cards was nerfed.
Sure. I'm happy that you told me this was in a tier 1 deck. That's so cool. This is such a cool design.
Well, when it first came out, it was like unplayable. There was a card called Wild Paw Null, which was 5 mana 3/5. This costs 1 less for every card from a different class you draw or add to your hand, which meant if all of your cards were rogue, but you just stayed to like turn 3 or 4, you would draw all these cards and they would just cost 0. Actually,
that's crazy.
I think I actually apologize. It interacted in the mulligan because if you're paladin and you only get rogue cards in your hand, the null would cost 0. So you would just blow people out.
Oh, wow.
And like you can see why that's probably not balanced. Like that is
of course.
So,
of course.
Yeah,
but like in theory, like if taking the degenerate BS out of it, like conceptually, just like for the rogue flavor, like 10 out of 10. This is so fucking cool.
Yeah, really, really cool card. That is all the cards I have to show you today. There is potentially a lot more. There's actually so many more I could pick from.
I was about to say, this is like, I think one of my favorite videos that we've done. And we've done a lot of these just because it's like, it's all like the what ifs, right? And some of them were ifs. Like they actually did make them in some regard. So this is really cool.
Okay, I'm glad. Okay,
I always love when they pull the curtain back, you know?
Well, to be fair, other than like a lot of the ones at the start of this video were like the chicken where you hovered over it, a lot of these probably weren't supposed to be showcased. They kind of just put it into a patch by accident and then removed it.
Oh, that's funny.
So these are a lot of designs and stuff that you can see only specifically because they did that. I don't think they really wanted us to know like this was behind the scenes, right? I don't think a lot of probably why Konami doesn't do that. Probably why Wizards of the Coast doesn't do that because maybe that's not good for business.
But they don't send the Pinkertons after you. Be careful.